Nick Reiner has spent months behind the walls of one of Los Angeles County's most closely watched jail facilities, accused of killing his own parents. Legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner and photographer and producer Michele Reiner. But now, the story is moving beyond the question of what allegedly happened inside the Reiners' Brentwood home. A new question is beginning to dominate the case. What is happening to Nick Reiner inside jail, and could his mental condition eventually become one of the most important issues in his defense? The latest reports reveal a man living under extraordinary restrictions, almost completely isolated from ordinary jail life. They also describe a disciplinary incident with deputies, continuing concerns about his mental health, a family divided by unimaginable grief, and a legal battle over money that could determine who represents him when his case reaches its most critical stage. And all of it is happening as September 15th approaches, when Reiner is scheduled to return to court for a preliminary hearing. To understand why these developments matter, we have to return to December 14th, 2025. That afternoon, Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Reiner, were found dead inside their Brentwood home in Los Angeles. Both had suffered multiple sharp force injuries. Rob Reiner was 78, Michele was 70. Their son, Nick Reiner, then 32, was arrested later that day near the University of Southern California. Prosecutors subsequently charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The allegations immediately attracted enormous national attention. Rob Reiner was not simply a famous Hollywood director. His career stretched across generations, from his role in All in the Family to directing movies including Stand By Me, When Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, Misery, and A Few Good Men. But the case quickly became about far more than celebrity. It became the story of a family that had publicly struggled for years with one son's addiction and mental health problems. Nick's history was never entirely hidden. He had spoken openly about drug addiction and repeated periods in rehabilitation facilities. His experiences helped inspire Being Charlie, the 2015 film he co-wrote and his father directed. That history now carries enormous significance, because being mentally ill and being legally insane are not the same thing. And that distinction may eventually become crucial. Nick pleaded not guilty on February 23, 2026. Since his arrest, he has remained in custody without bail at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in Los Angeles. Twin Towers is particularly significant because it houses large numbers of inmates requiring psychiatric observation and treatment. Reports describing Nick's incarceration paint a stark picture. He has reportedly been housed alone in a specialized medical observation unit under heightened security. He has been subjected to frequent monitoring, including checks approximately every 15 minutes, and has undergone psychiatric evaluations while in custody. For months, according to reporting about his jail conditions, much of his daily existence has been solitary. He eats alone. He is separated from the normal jail population. His movements are heavily controlled. Then came a previously undisclosed incident from April. According to a report published by People, Nick was disciplined after an encounter with deputies on April 27th. The incident reportedly began after Nick had taken a shower. He apparently expected to be escorted back to his cell, but deputies were dealing with a medical emergency involving another inmate. Nick allegedly became increasingly impatient. A source described him as becoming extremely hostile toward deputies. He reportedly shouted and used profanity, and additional personnel were called. But there is an important detail. According to the report, the confrontation did not become physical. No fight was reported. Instead, the incident was characterized as a verbal disturbance. Nick received a disciplinary write-up and temporarily lost several privileges, reportedly including access to phone calls, visitation, and commissary. On its own, a shouting incident inside a jail may not sound significant. But in this case, everything involving Nick's behavior is likely to receive intense scrutiny. Because his mental condition before the killings, his mental condition today, and his ability to participate meaningfully in his defense could become 3 separate legal questions. And they should not be confused. The first question concerns competency. Is Nick mentally capable of understanding the criminal proceedings against him and assisting his lawyers? That question deals with his condition now. The second question concerns his mental state at the time his parents were killed. That is a different issue entirely. California's insanity standard is demanding. A defendant does not become legally insane simply because he has schizophrenia, psychosis, addiction, or another serious psychiatric disorder. The issue is whether, because of a mental disease or defect, the defendant was incapable of understanding the nature and quality of his act, or incapable of understanding that what he was doing was morally or legally wrong. That creates a very high barrier. A documented psychiatric history can be powerful evidence, but a diagnosis alone does not answer the legal question. That is why speculation surrounding a possible insanity defense must be treated carefully. Nick's attorneys have not publicly established that this will be their formal strategy, but his history guarantees that mental health will be examined closely. Reports have said Nick had been treated for schizophrenia before his parents were killed. He also has a long history of substance abuse. There were reports that he had previously been placed under a conservatorship. Those facts could send lawyers searching through years of medical records. What medications was he prescribed? Was he taking them? Had medication recently been changed? What did doctors observe? What did family members notice? Were there previous psychotic episodes? Was there unusual behavior immediately before the killings? And perhaps most importantly, what was his mental state during the precise period in which prosecutors allege the murders occurred? Those questions could eventually require testimony from psychiatrists, psychologists, relatives, doctors, and other witnesses. But prosecutors would almost certainly examine another side of the story. They would look for evidence of planning. They would examine behavior before and after the killings. They would examine whether Nick attempted to conceal what happened, escape detection, or avoid police. Actions suggesting someone understood the consequences of his behavior could become extremely important if an insanity claim is ever made. That makes the timeline surrounding the killings particularly significant. Authorities have alleged that Rob and Michele were killed inside their Brentwood residence. Nick was arrested hours later. Reports also indicated that Rob and Nick had attended a holiday party hosted by Conan O'Brien the previous evening and had an argument there. But prosecutors have still revealed relatively little publicly about motive. Large portions of the case remain outside public view, and that uncertainty has created another major battle: money. Shortly after Nick's arrest, high-profile criminal defense attorney Alan Jackson entered the case. Jackson is one of the best-known defense lawyers in Los Angeles and previously represented Karen Reed in Massachusetts. But in January, Jackson abruptly withdrew. Nick was then represented by the Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. For months, the reason behind Jackson's departure remained the subject of speculation. Then, new court filings brought the financial dispute into public view. In June, Nick sought access to money from a trust created by his parents. According to the filing, the trust contains at least $1.5 million. Nick argues that under the terms of the trust, half of the assets should have been distributed to him when he turned 30, with the balance becoming available when he turns 35. He claims the money that should already have been distributed was withheld, and he says he needs it to fund his defense. The controversy is emotionally explosive for an obvious reason. Nick is accused of murdering the same parents who created the trust. But legally, the question is more complicated than simply asking whether someone accused of killing his parents should be allowed to use their money. The trust was established before the killings. Nick's petition argues that part of the money had already become legally payable to him based on his age. The filing also revealed something important about Alan Jackson. Jackson stated that his firm would consider representing Nick again if funding became available. According to reporting on the court documents, Nick's siblings, Jake and Romy, had initially been expected to help finance the private defense, but later withdrew that support. That helps explain why Jackson left and why the trust dispute matters. Nick currently has a public defender. That does not mean he lacks legal representation. Los Angeles has an experienced public defender's office capable of handling major homicide cases, but the fight over the trust could still change the composition of his defense team. And it reveals something deeper. This case has devastated the surviving Reiner family in ways that cannot easily be separated into prosecution and defense. Jake and Romy lost both parents. Their brother stands accused of killing them. Their family name is attached to a homicide case being followed around the world. And while their relationship with Nick is largely private, another relative has reportedly maintained contact with him. Rob Reiner's sister, Annie Reiner, has reportedly supported Nick during the legal proceedings and visited him while he has been incarcerated. That does not mean she believes he is innocent. Supporting a relative and deciding whether that relative committed a crime are two entirely different things. But her reported involvement illustrates one of the most painful realities in cases involving violence within families. The person accused of causing the devastation may still be somebody another family member has loved since childhood. There is no simple emotional position. For one relative, Nick is the man accused of killing Rob and Michele. For another, he may simultaneously remain a nephew suffering from profound psychiatric problems. Both realities can exist in the same family. Meanwhile, Jake and Rami have publicly focused on remembering their parents. On August 2nd, more than 7 months after the killings, the two siblings appeared at Dodger Stadium and threw ceremonial first pitches in honor of Rob and Michele. Baseball had been deeply connected to the Reiner family for generations. The appearance provided a striking contrast to what was happening only miles away. While Jake and Romy stood on a baseball field honoring their parents, Nick remained inside Twin Towers waiting for the criminal process to move forward. That process has moved slowly. At his April 29th court appearance, Nick waived his right to a speedy preliminary hearing. The next major hearing was scheduled for September 15th. A preliminary hearing is not a trial. Its purpose is primarily to determine whether prosecutors have sufficient evidence for the case to proceed. But this hearing could still become extraordinarily important. It may give the public its clearest look yet at evidence that has remained largely hidden. Witness testimony could begin filling gaps in the timeline. More details about the crime scene may emerge. Investigators may reveal evidence concerning Nick's movements. And depending on how the defense proceeds, questions about his mental condition could become increasingly difficult to avoid. There is also the possibility of a competency challenge at some point. If a court finds that a defendant is not presently competent to stand trial, criminal proceedings can be suspended while treatment is provided in an effort to restore competency. That does not mean the charges disappear. It does not mean the person has been found legally insane. And it does not mean the defendant has been acquitted. It simply means the prosecution cannot continue normally until the defendant is capable of understanding the proceedings and assisting counsel. That distinction will be essential if mental health becomes a central issue in this case. Competency asks whether Nick can participate in his defense today. An insanity defense would ask something very different. What was happening inside his mind at the moment Rob and Michele were killed? Those are separate battles, and proving legal insanity is notoriously difficult. American criminal history contains rare examples in which insanity defenses succeeded. John Hinckley Jr. was found not guilty by reason of insanity after shooting President Ronald Reagan and others in 1981. Andrea Yates was eventually found not guilty by reason of insanity after drowning her 5 children in Texas. But there are also famous cases where severe psychiatric abnormalities did not produce an insanity verdict. Jeffrey Dahmer admitted killing numerous victims and attempted to establish that he was legally insane. The jury rejected that argument. The lesson is simple. The diagnosis is only the beginning. The legal question is what that illness caused the defendant to understand, or fail to understand, when the crime happened. For Nick Reiner, that could require reconstructing his mental condition almost minute by minute. And prosecutors will be doing their own reconstruction. That is why seemingly small details may eventually matter. Conversations, text messages, phone records, surveillance video, witness observations, medication records, behavior at the holiday party, behavior inside the house, behavior after he left, and everything investigators documented during the hours before his arrest. Those pieces could eventually tell a story very different from the one the public currently sees. Right now, there are still enormous gaps. There has been no trial. Nick Reiner has pleaded not guilty. The allegations against him have not been proven before a jury. And despite widespread discussion about schizophrenia and a possible insanity defense, no jury has determined what role, if any, mental illness played in the deaths of Rob and Michele Reiner. That is exactly why the next phase matters. The story is no longer simply about the horrific discovery inside a Brentwood home. It is becoming a battle over evidence, psychiatry, competency, money, and family loyalty. Nick's confrontation with deputies offers a glimpse into the pressures of his life inside jail. The trust dispute reveals how dramatically the killings have altered relationships within the family. His documented history of addiction and mental health treatment creates questions that defense attorneys cannot ignore. and the approaching preliminary hearing could finally expose evidence that has remained hidden for months. There is one question, however, that may ultimately overshadow everything else. If Nick Reiner committed these killings, as prosecutors allege, what was happening inside his mind when they occurred? Was he capable of understanding his actions? Did he understand that what he was doing was wrong? Or will the evidence show that, despite years of psychiatric problems, he still possessed the legal awareness required for criminal responsibility? Those questions cannot be answered by speculation. They cannot be answered by a diagnosis alone. And they cannot be answered by what Nick looks like inside a courtroom or how he behaves inside jail. They will have to be answered with evidence. For now, Nick Reiner remains accused, not convicted. Rob and Michele Reiner remain the victims at the center of an extraordinary family tragedy. And on September 15th, the criminal case is scheduled to take another major step forward. What happens in that courtroom could tell us much more about where this case is heading. Toward a conventional double murder prosecution, toward a major battle over mental health, or toward a legal fight far more complicated than anyone imagined when police first entered that Brentwood home.